Hello team, this is an ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update for the 3rd of October 2023. Sorry this video is late, other things got in the way, and my goodness there's quite a lot to talk about. Probably my second video today, although is a little bit later with one of my best mates we're going to be discussing. Anyway, let's go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before all the usual caveats apply. Of course, you can see them in the description for the video below. 360 personnel lost, 15 tanks, 8 armored personnel vehicles. Okay, so 360 is fewer personnel than we have seen on the last few days, but round about where it's been for the week prior to that. 15 tanks is a large number of tanks. I've seen a whole bunch of footage coming out of quite a lot of armor being destroyed in a number of different places and via a number of different methods. 8 armored personnel vehicles is also a sore loss for the Russians. 40 pieces of artillery is massive, and you know how accurate you see that number, we can argue all day. There's just a big unknown. There is a lot of footage, but that footage is nowhere near what the claims are. But as I was talking to Andrew Perpetua about this in a live stream. Go and check that out. Yesterday's live stream where we talked about this is like whenever he speaks to drone operators, and he does that, he says they've got like, oh, do you want me to show you? And they have like hundreds of pieces of footage that aren't out there in the information space, and each one of them has these just huge numbers of vehicles and targets being hit by their drones that they've recorded, but they don't put it all on the internet. There's only a small fraction of what is destroyed on the internet. But the question is, how big is that fraction? You know, is it you know, are we seeing only 10%? Are we seeing 50%? Are we seeing 90% of what's, you know, it is so difficult to know. So there is going to be a smaller array of footage and evidence than there are claims. Okay, we just have to work out whether these are somewhat correct. As I've said before a number of times, Dom Nichols from Ukrainian Latest podcast talked about how, well, he talked with an analyst, I think an American analyst, who said we take off 20% and we think that's accurate. But I have no idea of the provenance of that claim or the methodology behind it. But my guess is that they are degrading the Russians at significant numbers, and that the Ukrainians are losing less than the Russians. However, the Ukrainians are still losing a lot of stuff and people. And it comes down to, and this, I thought this part of the discussion last night with Andrew Perpetua was really valuable. So the success for the Ukrainians will come after they have degraded the Russians' armor and large equipment and artillery to the point where they can then just to use electronic warfare to shut down any drones. Because at the moment, if you use electronic warfare, both sides have got drones flying everywhere. So if you're going to use electronic warfare to knock out drones, you're going to knock out your own drones. So they're kind of reticent to use that on a wide scale basis, as far as I would understand it. But once you've taken out all the armor and all the artillery that you need, then those drones are less useful. They'll be just hitting individual kind of groups of people. Okay, use electronic warfare to just completely wipe out all the drones and then move forward. This might take months, right? This might not be the situation until early spring, right? Or late winter, right? But it will happen. I am confident in the Ukrainians, but I don't think the counteroffensive at the moment is going to bring about huge amounts of territorial gains, because they are not at the stage where the Russian forces have been crippled enough in terms of their armor capabilities and capacity. Right, 20 drones were taken out. That's probably from the night before. And then we've got 23 vehicles and fuel tanks and 5 pieces of special equipment. 23 vehicles and fuel tank is a decent number of mainly logistical vehicles, and 5 pieces of special equipment will be pretty meaningful given the average over the war is less than 2. So that's a decent day. So you make of those figures what you will. It's just another symbol, I think, of a continued degradation of the Russian armor. Right, here we have, and this is Andrew Perpetua himself talking about the video he was referencing last night. This is in a place called near Novomykhailivka, so just north of Vuhledar, on the way to Mariinka, if you know where that is on the map. I don't have my map up at the moment. But he was talking about how these big FAB 500 bombs were released near there, but they didn't land in the town. They actually landed on the outside of the town. And I would suggest that might be because of electronic warfare, messing around with the guidance on these bombs. He was saying there's an interesting discussion about how the electronic warfare on JDAMs, which is the equivalent, these dumb munitions that are given guidance and fins to give them greater precision and range. But actually, there's been this problem with the US provided JDAMs where electronic warfare knocks them out. And he was saying that this could well be due to a safety mechanism. So that the US, when they're making weapons, are actually far more interested in making them safer so you don't get collateral damage. So and we see this with certain cruise missiles, so things like Storm Shadows, if it's interfered with or is knocked off course, is not going to land where it's supposed to land, then it won't go off and it will land in a field, so as not to cause unnecessary damage to civilians or whatever. Western nations seem to do that more with their weapons. So the JDAM, if it's messed with and is going to go off course, then its fuse will disengage. This is how I understand it. I might be wrong, right? So the JDAM will then be ineffective. Rather than land nearby and still cause a problem because it's all a war zone, they will not go off. Whereas the FAB 500s, the Russians, it's interfered with by electronic warfare, it's still going to land, it's still going to blow up. They don't have those kind of safety things involved. So it just blows up somewhere else over there. But that can still cause damage because actually most places around here on the front line are going to be war zones. It's slightly different if you're moving back and you're trying to hit somewhere like 30 kilometers behind the front line. But here, this is fairly close to the front line. And these bombs land on the outside of the town rather than in the middle where they're trying to hit something in the middle, supposedly. So you can see that they land. And then what happens afterwards is these cause all these FAB 500s. One lands on a road and one lands in the middle of the field. And the one in the middle of the field, interestingly, only triggers a couple of mines to go off, and one that lands by the side of the road triggers a whole bunch of mines to explode next to the road along it. I'm trying not to show too much here because I keep getting hammered for showing stuff, but it was just an interesting outcome to a bomb missing, because it showed A, that there's heavy mines around there, and B, that most of the mines that the Ukrainians have laid are along the roadside, and C, that these bombs can trigger mines. So it is a way perhaps of mine clearing. Here we have a Russian 2C7 Peony being taken out. So this is, as you can see, a pretty large self-propelled gun, and it gets taken out by HIMARS, and the precision of the HIMARS is just completely on point there, and that shows that the Ukrainians are using HIMARS quite widely to take out these single bits of equipment. And that's where they're at. They're almost having to use these instead of airframes. So artillery is doing the job of airframes. We talked about last night in the live stream. And here we have a really large self-propelled gun being taken out by a guided multiple launch rocket system, and that HIMARS doing pretty substantial damage, and the tungsten as well, all around the outside in the big ring there. But I'm trying not to show you too much anyway. Whatever, I'll still get hammered. Last night, near occupied Yanakieva, a freight train collided with a Strela 10 air defense complex. So this is a short-range air defense system that both sides use. 3 Russian servicemen were killed and 2 were wounded. Strela's a bit like putting a man-pad on the back, so a portable air defense system on the back of a vehicle, kind of like the Avengers do with the Stingers. That's kind of a 2 pods of Stinger missiles on the back of a Humvee That's what the Avenger is. Well, the Strela is similar to that. Locomotive and railway tracks were damaged. The air defense complexes are likely also damaged, and 3 Russian servicemen were killed and 2 were wounded. So a bit of a problem there, but actually could be good for the Ukrainians. That accident, fairly costly. And then 30 kilometers back from the front line, we have, that's 19 miles, behind the front, the Ukrainian special forces hit a Russian grouping of vehicles in Zaporizhia Oblast, destroying at least 5 BMPs, 2 trucks, and a field munitions dump with indirect fire. This is where sometimes you get... Andrew Perpetua was talking about this last night again with a failed attack of the Russians around Uruzhaina, where they lost, like a dozen vehicles all in one, just in one kind of attack. And sometimes you look at these figures and you're like, where do you get 15 tanks from? Or where do you get 15 APVs from? Or whatever the figures might be. And you're like, well, actually, just in one attack, they've lost a whole bunch. Now, of course, that can happen and does happen with the Ukrainians as well. There are some pretty... unfortunate attacks that they've tried to prosecute recently that have gone wrong, and they have lost a whole bunch of stuff. So this isn't just something that happens to the Russians, of course, but here we have an example of how 30 kilometers behind the lines we have a large number of pieces of equipment hit by indirect fire. So that's possibly like 30 kilometer range. It's pretty good, because if that's 30 kilometers behind the front line and you're using artillery to do that, then your artillery is going to be 10 kilometers or so back from the front line, probably more than 10 kilometers back, so it doesn't get hit by drones, 10 kilometer range drones, so maybe 15 kilometers. So that's 45 kilometers for indirect fire. That is showing that the Ukrainians have a range advantage over the Russians in terms of their artillery. Their artillery is more accurate. The barrels are in better shape, not exclusively, but generally appear to be in better shape. They're newer, a lot of the stuff, because if it's being provided by the West, by the Allies, and that gives them an advantage in that respect. Right, here we have, I'm going to show you this. There's nothing dodgy about this, but it's just incredible. I've shown you a number of bits of footage about this that just kind of blow my mind. It's only with videos like this that give people a real idea of the levels of increased lethality that FPV drones, first-person view drones, represent versus missiles. A Javelin won't hunt you into a room for $100,000. Look at this video and think on the fact that this drone is going for about $300, right? So here we have a drone. You don't see anything dodgy here, so don't worry. In fact, you see someone run out beforehand, running out here. I don't know what's going on, unless they ran in. But this drone goes into the building, through a door, and then looks to go through a second door, and it's flying pretty fast. But I don't know exactly what happens, and whether anyone was taken out, whatever. But you've got a drone being able to do that. We've seen drones go through windows to take out Muon M surveillance units and so on and so forth. It's this is an evolution of warfare that we are seeing take place. Okay, in Rostov-on-Don, partisans. This is really significant because you've got partisans within Russia, right, doing stuff that on behalf really of the Ukrainian armed forces, or on behalf of the war effort. Partisans have reportedly set fire to a warehouse with military uniforms. The Skrypach, probably not pronouncing that correctly, partisan movement took responsibility for the attack, and that ended up being a fairly significant fire within Rostov-on-Don. I guess, nonetheless, it's not whether, okay, so they don't have a whole stockpile of uniforms. Is that the biggest loss to the Russian army? No, obviously not. But it's what this communicates to other people. It's did you hear about that? Yeah. What happened? Was that Russians? Oh my goodness, our guys on that. Okay, and then it gives you permission to think that it's acceptable not to approve of the Russian war effort. That's what stuff like this does. I think it has a significant psychological effect, and that's well worth taking into account. Right, moving on to strikes, distant strikes. Ukrainian Air Defense Forces destroyed 29 drones and 1 cruise missile in a wave of attacks last night. The night before, if you remember, there was just a smaller number of threats, and they were taking weird routes. And I was talking about how that's probably a precursor for a larger wave as they try and find out where air defences are and aren't. Anyway, a larger wave did take place last night, although only one cruise missile. So 29 out of the 31 drones and one missile was shot down. Russia launched 31 Shaheeds and one Iskander. So that's 100% on Iskander and a very good interception rate for drones, which is actually better than we have seen for a good couple of days. So yeah, I think that's good news for the Ukrainians there. Now, as you can see, most of these appear to have taken place in Mykolaiv and Dnipropetrovsk. So if we look at the map, there's Mykolaiv down towards Kherson and Dnipro over in those kind of areas. It's worth saying that at the moment there have been air raid sirens going, so I don't think that has finished, although it might be over now. Another explosion in Mykolaiv a couple of hours after the previous one. 2 missiles and drones were reported to be in the airspace, and air alert is active there right now, says Tim White. So yeah, these things often go on into the day. No, they're not just nocturnal attacks. Now we're going to go on to a train that we talked about last night in the live stream again. This was a train full of Ukrainian equipment that was hit. Some claim with an Iskander. I mean, there's some discussion in this thread whether it's a Tornado, FAB, or Iskander. Whatever it hits has quite some sort of blast, but it does miss. But the fragments that fly out afterwards will be shredding stuff on that train for sure. Absolutely destructive there. And in fact, there's another video alongside this of possibly an equipment conglomeration there, and just look at the radius of that. I mean, this is one they're saying is almost certainly definitely an Iskander. Huge blast radius there with stuff flying everywhere, so that's going to be really hugely damaging. But anyway, that explains a high number of pieces of equipment taken out as a result of Iskander that were on Andriy Perpetua's list the other day. That's a few days ago. Russian forces used over 1,200 missiles and kamikaze drones to attack Ukraine's energy system between October 2022 and April of this year. State-owned power grid operator Ukrainigo said some 250 missiles and drones hit their sites alone. So if the Russians are going to do that again this year, then they would need to expend an awful lot of missiles. Do they have those missiles? And if they do the Ukrainians have stuff in place in order to combat that? So what are the air defense systems looking like around their energy infrastructure? Are they able to deal with that? John Ridge here, this is notably less than a total of approximately 1,700 cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, one-way attack drones, and other munitions for this time period from the ZSU's public releases, indicate substantial numbers of other targets in the Russian targeting matrix. Of course, there are going to be a lot of missiles that weren't just going for energy targets. Right, at DTEK, the energy company in Dnipropetrovsk region, says its warehouses were hit in Russia's latest attack. So this was from yesterday, so this would be the night from the 1st to the 2nd. Warehouses, equipment and materials purchased by DTEK for restoration work in the winter were destroyed. A reminder, attacking civilian power supplies is a war crime. This is what the Russians did last year, and it does seem to be what they're gearing up to do again. Right. On to other bits and pieces now. First of all, Russian authorities accidentally revealed the addresses of the country's secret military buildings, institutions and spy homes in Moscow and in St. Petersburg. It's an interesting Newsweek piece here where it talks about how there is released online some documentation. I don't think it was anything like a proper leak or anything. I think it was maybe accidental, but they put online places that can't have their energy taken out. So if you're talking about energy infrastructure being hit by the Ukrainians as opposed to Russians hitting Ukrainian ones, then here we have the idea that these are really important places, high value buildings and structures within Moscow and St. Petersburg that cannot lose their power. And that's been released online. It's like, oh, that appears to be where all your FSB and military installations and this and that. So you can piece together exactly where high value targets are in Moscow and St. Petersburg due to the fact that these are ones that cannot lose power in an emergency. So that's a bit of a faux pas by the Russians there. Then we go on to, and I know I've done an awful lot of talking about Elon Musk, but everyone is talking about it, and this is really big news. And it's big news because actually he's really peed off an awful lot of Ukrainians when he came out and slagged off. I said took the mickey. People are like, what does take the mickey mean? Because I assume that everyone has British parlance, right, and idioms and slang. It means to ridicule, to take the P out of, to make fun of. So if you've got Elon Musk now making fun of Zelensky, who is fighting for his existential future for himself personally and for his country, and you're taking the mickey out of him, then where does that position you? And the interesting thing about Musk is that at the beginning of the war, he was saying stuff like this, hold strong, Ukraine. And then something happened. And just to remind you that I did a video on what that something that happened might have been. I did that back in June, and I said, follow the money. And it turns out that he is possibly being put under pressure by Russia and China with regard to access to raw materials. I think is the only corporation in China that's able to work independently. You're like, whoa, quid pro quo there. What are they getting from you being able to operate fairly freely in China? That's an absolute rarity. So it turns out that Tesla and SpaceX need a whole lot of raw materials from both Russia and China, and because at some point he went from hold strong Ukraine to taking the mickey out of Zelensky. So something's happened there, and this then has really annoyed a lot of Ukrainians yesterday. You may have seen, actually let's go to the advisor to the President Zelensky saying any silence or mockery of Ukraine is unconditional encouragement of Russia propaganda justifying mass violence. That's the advisor to the president. Now Zelensky hasn't said anything himself, but this is not gone down well in Ukraine. In fact, Politico have written an article on Elon Musk mocks Zelensky over calls for aid and talks about how people are not happy with this in Ukraine. Musk has had a troubled relationship with the Ukrainians and the country's administration since Vladimir Putin launched his full-scale invasion in February 2022. However, they just about had enough of the SpaceX chief and the owner of X, formerly Twitter. Quote, so you have bought social media to bully people who are dying because they love freedom, Ukrainian stand-up comedian Anton Timoshenko wrote in response to Musk's post. Elon, you write this meme during a friendly conversation with Putin on the phone. Another Ukrainian comic and volunteer, Vasil Baidak, wrote, alluding to the New Yorker report that Musk had the Russian president on the phone. They spoke directly. Even Ukrainian media organizations joined the anti-Musk revolt, with top publication Ukrainska Pravda posting the meme. And this is the meme I think they have here. Yeah. So Ukrainska Pravda in English, when it's been 5 minutes and you haven't spread Russian propaganda, and they've photoshopped Musk's face onto Zelensky's head there. So a lot of Ukrainians, says Michael Weiss, were reluctant to assail Musk even after previous tweets reporting about Starlink, etc. He was genuinely popular. Now here is a Ukrainian news outlet after Musk mocked vital aid to a country fending off genocide. Jonestown had better public relations. It's gone a bit sour for him. Now, what's really interesting and definitely worthy of note is that the Russian propagandists are loving Trump, right? And if Musk, my bad, which is true, the propagandists love Trump as well. If these propagandists who in the same kind of conversations are advocating genocide, right? If they are saying Musk really only has one way out of this, admit he is on Russia's side. That's what Skabivka said. And then also, Skabivka says Elon Musk is magnificent. He is wonderful. Whilst also saying, in these kind of conversations, someone else saying the Ukrainian question has to be answered once and for all. And the Ukrainian question sounds rather like the Jewish question, which then led to the final solution. So this is all like really dubious rhetoric, but part of that dubious rhetoric is this adulation of Musk. why would Russian genocidal propagandists give adulation to Musk unless he was saying stuff that was truly controversial? So then Euromaidan Press has come out and done this article, fairly typical, but no, Elon Musk, Ukraine aid is the ultimate investment, which is going back to, you know, the idea that when it's been 5 minutes and you haven't asked for $1 billion in aid, you know, the anger on Zelensky because he's not getting all that much. You're like, well, you know, moving aside from that actual sort of tweet, the Euromaidan Press does a pretty good job here of saying, well, actually, this is those billions of dollars coming, in this case, you know, the implication is from the US, is actually a really good investment. And it goes through how this is the case. Ukraine has destroyed 50% of Russia's combat power with peanuts. Let's first look at how much money Washington has given Kiev over a year and a half of the full-scale war with Russia. The US has approved 4 rounds of aid packages for Ukraine in response to Russia's invasion, totaling approximately $113 billion. However, according to calculations by the Washington Post, so far Ukraine has only received $43 billion of military assistance and $23 billion of macro financial and humanitarian aid. So it's about half of what has supposedly been given. And of course, we can talk about how you tot up those figures, how they can be kind of mistaken valuations, but also how they are not money, first of all, not money out of the US banks, so that it's not going on housing and hospitals. You know, it's not a zero-sum game. This is money that is part of, you know, future structured military budgeting. So actually some of this will be going on into like 2030. I've talked in previous videos about how, you know, this is money that is going out in subsequent years as well. So there is little surprise, actually, of the 113 billion, they've only got sort of 60 something billion of that apparently so far. In 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, it continues, the US defense budget was 715 billion. In 2023, in the second year of the invasion, it's increased to 858 billion. If we take all the military assistance provided to Ukraine so far and calculate it as a percentage, although the aid has been provided for 2 consecutive years, it comes out around 5% of the 2023 American defense budget. And of course, then you've got complications because actually it's being taken forward year on year as well. So actually that money hasn't gone from that budget in that year anyway, necessarily. So, but all that aside, 5% of the defense budget, and what has that achieved? According to the New York Times, Russia's military casualties are nearing 300,000, including fatalities and injuries, and the Center for European Policy Analysis says that nearly half of Russia's conventional military capability has now been destroyed. People ask me, is it worth it? Here's what we've gotten for our investment. We haven't lost one soldier. We've reduced the combat power of the Russian army by 50%, and not one of us has died in that endeavor. This is a great deal for America, noted American Senator Lindsey Graham, which I reported when he said that. And yeah, absolutely. So then you've got geopolitical gains with regard to China and Taiwan and that geopolitical chess game that's taking place. And then it goes on to talk about all the things I talked about before, which is boosting the US economy, being a stimulus in the industrial military complex, jobs, tax revenues, sales for these pieces of equipment abroad, so on and so forth. Elon Musk himself, and also it backfills the US Army with newer stuff. So if they're giving older stuff, then they're being forced to buy newer stuff. So it actually upgrades the US defense capability. And then it goes on to say, regarding Elon Musk, he stands to gain substantial advantages from American military aid to Ukraine. Documents obtained by CNN indicate that SpaceX has sought Pentagon funding for Starlink satellite services in Ukraine with estimated costs of up to $400 million annually. It's plausible that since the US government is providing Musk with such significant financial support, it would also expect a high degree of accountability and compliance with contracts. Despite Musk's status as one of the world's wealthiest individuals, the US government probably maintains considerable oversight. So this is where he might be saying a bunch of crazy stuff, but hopefully actually behind the scenes now the US has taken over some of the provision themselves of Starlink for Ukraine, where they are not geofencing the technology, so it wasn't able to be used over Crimea and so on and so forth. Now they've taken it over. They have much more oversight of over how it's used, rather than that being the decision of one individual, wealthy individual sitting in his condominium wherever, right? So anyway, interesting article that goes into lots more detail than I've sort of whizzed through here, but this is a big thing, and I know I might bore some of you, and some of you might really love him. But he's saying stuff that is essentially Russian propaganda. The Russian propagandists are loving him, and the Ukrainians are getting really angry. So if you are pro-Ukrainian, then this is somewhat compromising if you like Elon Musk a lot. And then, there are other issues. I've got lots of people complaining that actually pro-Ukrainian sources like NATO sources and Here No Reports are being deboosted by Twitter or X. The codes seem to be stripping them of likes, of views, and so on and so forth. And there was leaked coding back from months ago saying that actually pro-Ukrainian messaging is deemed as disinformation and is downvalued in the algorithm. So these sort of things are supposedly still going on. It's for someone that's a free speech absolutist, it appears that certain speech is freer than others. So, for example, I went on Twitter today, and I wonder if it still works. Well, I did this. Let's see if it works. It might not, because it's renewed. So I went on to Twitter today, and the first tweet was an Elon Musk tweet. Now, I don't follow Elon Musk, so then I did some research, and I did remember this, but he is having his own Twitter feed boosted by 1,000% or something, 1,000 times, and he got his coders to do that because he didn't like that Joe Biden's tweet was more watched than his tweet, more viewed than his tweet. So he got his coders to boost his own voice. Now, this is really interesting, that if you are a free speech absolutist, you can't have it that some speech is freer than others, because that's not free speech. So he's boosting his own. Like 3 times in the last 24 hours, his tweet has been number one on my feed. I don't follow him, so it's been thrown in me. So that's happening for millions of people around the world. So he's boosting his own speech. He's deboosting speech that he doesn't like. And we've seen that from leaked coding, and we're seeing anecdotal complaints from NAFO that they are and other people, like some of my sources, that they are not being viewed. And you're thinking this is the opposite of free speech. It really is. So it's a bit of a problem. I really advise going and looking back at Pekka Kallioniemi's thread from, actually Thierry's reposted this back from June, and I used that in my video analysis here, which is also worth looking at. Go back and look at my one on Musk and Russia and following the money. Anyway, sorry to talk about him again, but it is really important. Lots of people are talking about him. It is what it is. Thank you. Take care. Speak soon. Really appreciate your support. Toodle pips.